There are burdens you never admit out loud, yet they weigh on you just the same. Silent burdens, almost invisible ones that no one else notices, but that still shape the way you breathe, the way you react, the way you love. And the strangest part is that they don't come from your present. They don't come from anything you're facing today. They come from behind you, from a mistake you never corrected, from a decision you still blame yourself for, from a betrayal you never understood, from a version of yourself that no longer exists, but somehow still rules your life as if it had the right to do so. And maybe you've grown used to carrying all of that, walking with that weight on your back, thinking it was normal, thinking adulthood meant learning to carry guilt, memories, losses, words you never said, endings no one ever explained. But at some point, you started noticing it. Every time you tried to move forward, something pulled you back. Every time you wanted to build something new, the past reclaimed territory. Every time you tried to trust, an old shadow reminded you why you shouldn't, and you accepted it as if it were inevitable, as if the past had authority over your future, as if the most broken version of you had the right to guide the version that finally woke up. But that's not true. It never has been. The problem is, no one ever taught us how to free ourselves, how to truly let go, how to close chapters without waiting for someone else to close them, how to forgive ourselves without asking for permission, how to stop replaying the same story in our minds as if repeating it could somehow change it. No one ever explained that the past doesn't hurt because of what it was, but because of how we keep interpreting it today. That the wound doesn't bleed because it's open, but because you keep running your finger over it again and again. No one taught us that remembering is not an obligation. It's a choice. That repeating is not destiny, it's habit. That carrying is not responsibility, it's conditioning. And now you're here, just days away from the end of the year. A year that may have given you far more than you were ready to process. A year that showed you the limits of your strength, but also the limits of your excuses. A year in which you realized that simply surviving is not enough. And even if you don't say it out loud, you know perfectly well that you can't go into the next year as the same person. You can't keep justifying what's destroying you. You can't keep explaining things that no longer have a solution. You can't keep punishing yourself for decisions you've already paid for 10 times over. You can't keep pausing your life waiting for answers that will never come. That's why this episode is not just another one. This episode is a closing, not symbolic, not poetic real. It's a space to break the mental inertia that has kept you trapped. A space for you before the year ends, to end what the year itself couldn't end for you. This isn't about romanticizing pain. This is about confronting it, giving it shape, taking it apart, and doing something very few people in this world have the courage to do. Declaring an internal ending, even if the story still feels incomplete. Because waiting for the past to resolve itself is just an elegant way of postponing your life. I want you to imagine something. Think about all the times you were just about to move forward, but something inside you stopped you. Think about all the opportunities you let slip because you were still mentally responding to something that happened years ago. Think about all the relationships you never gave a chance to or gave too much to because an old memory was still directing your decisions. Think about how many beautiful things you didn't live because of loyalty to a pain that no longer deserves you. And now ask yourself, how many more times will you allow this? How many more times will you let the past steal new experiences from you? How much longer will you delay the life you could already be living? We tend to believe that healing requires time, but that's not true. Healing requires a decision, and decisions always happen in an instant, not on a new year, not in a pending conversation, not in an apology that never came, in a single moment, in that moment when you say, enough. In that moment when you acknowledge you can't change what happened, but you can stop allowing it to happen inside you. In that moment when you accept you don't need perfect understanding in order to move forward. In that moment when you stop waiting for explanations and allow yourself to go on, and that moment could be today. You are standing in front of one of the most uncomfortable and most liberating topics in Stoic philosophy, the relationship with the past. Not to rewrite it, but to stop being its hostage. Not to erase it, but to turn it into a tool. Not to forget, but to avoid repeating. Not to justify the pain, but to reclaim your power. Because if there's one thing that's true, it's this: there won't be another opportunity like this one. The year is ending, and whatever you don't close now, you'll drag into the next. And you don't deserve that. Life isn't as long as you think, and you already know far too well the weight of dragging what no longer exists. Today, perhaps for the first time in a long time, you have a real chance to let go. Not symbolically, not emotionally, truly. So breathe. Because from here on, we are going to walk step by step through the 12 Stoic rules that can finally break your bond with the past. And if you listen with honesty, this episode won't just accompany you, it will change you. Before we begin, I want you to declare your commitment by commenting, "From today on, I stop living in my past." That sentence will be your reminder that you're here to close cycles, not to keep dragging wounds that already served their purpose. This is your moment to prove to yourself that you deserve to move forward, that you deserve lightness, that you deserve a life no longer ruled by memories that hold you back. Without further delay, let's begin. First Stoic rule: stop asking the past for an explanation it cannot give you. There is a quiet habit that consumes entire years of a person's life without them noticing it. The need to understand why what happened. Why did they leave me? Why did I fail? Why wasn't I enough? Why did that door close? Why did I have to go through that? Questions that sound profound, but are nothing more than an anchor disguised as introspection. The past does not answer. Not because it is cruel, but because it no longer exists. The only thing that exists is the meaning you continue to feed it. And still, many keep knocking on the same mental door, as if insisting could bring something back to life that is already over. What they don't realize is that every time you search for explanations, you give the past power again. You hand it your present. You hand it your energy, you hand it your ability to move forward. The Stoic understood something the modern mind struggles to accept. Reality has no obligation to justify itself. What happened does not need your approval, your understanding, or your emotional closure. It simply happened. And the more time you spend trying to interpret something that has already passed, the more you distance yourself from the only thing you can still transform, the now. The explanation you're looking for is actually a fantasy, an illusion that convinces you that if you can just understand the cause, you'll somehow avoid repeating the pain. But life doesn't work like that. You don't repeat the pain because you don't understand the past. You repeat it because you keep living as if the past was still alive. Asking for explanations is a sophisticated form of resistance. It means mentally reconstructing scenes, conversations, gestures, decisions, hoping to find some hidden detail that gives meaning to what hurt you. But there is no detail that will be enough. There is no phrase capable of rewinding time, no memory clear enough to save you from the emptiness left behind. And yet, you keep searching, you keep analyzing, you keep repeating. Like someone digging for treasure in soil that was excavated 1,000 times already, unaware that the riches are elsewhere. That mental effort, that emotional exhaustion, that obsession with deciphering what has already ended, this is exactly what keeps you trapped. It's not the past stopping you from moving forward. It's you returning to it. When the Stoics spoke of accepting the fact, they were not talking about resignation. They didn't say, forget it and move on. They said, stop fighting what has already happened, because that fight is useless and it destroys you. The energy you spend trying to understand why something happened is the energy you need to make something new happen now. But the human mind fears letting go. It fears admitting that there was no perfect reason, no clear lesson, no hidden message. It fears acknowledging that life is more chaotic and less explainable than we'd like it to be. So it invents explanations, builds theories, creates imaginary responsibilities. It convinces you that if you find the why, you'll feel relief. And there is no more dangerous lie than that. The past does not explain itself because it is no longer happening. The only thing you can explain is what you're doing today with what happened. You can ask yourself, how did it shape me? What did it protect me from without me realizing it? What did it reveal about what I need to learn? What version of me died that day, and which one needs to be born? What boundaries must I reinforce? What behavior must I abandon? These are Stoic questions, questions that turn pain into direction, not imprisonment. They don't seek meaning in the past, they seek purpose in the present. But you still hope that a memory will become kinder if you look at it one more time. It won't. It will not change. It will not become fair. It will not become logical. It will not become different. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner you will stop exhausting yourself in battles no one is fighting with you. When you ask the past for explanations, you are not talking to the past, you are arguing with yourself. You are debating with a version of you that no longer exists, trying to convince a ghost to give you answers it will never have. It's like demanding the ocean return a wave that has already broken. What left, left. What hurt, hurt. What marked you, marked you. No question can change that. The Stoic moved forward because they understood that acceptance was not resignation, but redirection. Acceptance is not giving up, it is focus. It is recognizing that something happened, but refusing to let it keep happening inside you. Acceptance is saying, I don't know why it happened, but I know what I will do with what I feel. And that sentence, though small, is a declaration of war against the weight of the past. It is how you begin to reclaim your power. Because when you stop insisting on getting an impossible explanation, you open the door to building a new reality. And here is the part no one tells you. Explanations don't heal. Action does. Responsibility does. Change does. Commitment does. Clarity does. When you stop asking the past for answers, you start hearing your inner voice without interference. And that voice doesn't ask you to go backward. It asks you to move, to grow, to choose direction, to take what you lived and turn it into something useful, to let go of the need to understand, and embrace the need to advance. Maybe you will never understand why something ended. Maybe you will never comprehend why someone acted the way they did. Maybe you will never discover what you could have done differently. And maybe that lack of explanation is precisely the push you needed to stop looking back. Because as long as you believe a piece is missing, you will keep your life on pause. But when you accept that the piece never existed, you can finally continue without waiting for yesterday to give you clarity. Stopping the need for explanations is not forgetting what happened. It is choosing not to use it as an excuse to limit your future. It is honoring what you lived without remaining trapped in it. It is looking forward without asking for permission. It is letting life move on without the constant need to justify every chapter. It is understanding that some stories do not close with answers, but with decisions. And this Stoic rule, though it may seem harsh, is one of the most liberating ones. The past owes you nothing, but you owe yourself the chance to move on. When you accept that, you'll feel something you haven't felt in a long time: lightness. Second Stoic rule: turn every painful memory into a concrete lesson. There are memories that still follow you, not because they're powerful, but because you keep giving them permission to return. There are scenes that replay themselves again and again, not because they have anything new to tell you, but because you continue receiving them as if they were authorities over your life. A painful memory can become an executioner, or it can become a teacher. The difference isn't in what happened, but in what you choose to do with it. An untrained mind relives the past as if it were an inevitable command. The Stoic mind analyzes it, organizes it, and transforms it into direction. That's why this rule is essential. If a memory keeps coming back, it's because it still has something to teach you. If you don't extract the lesson, it will continue to chase you. The past doesn't return to torture you. It returns to show you what remains unresolved. What hurts isn't the memory itself, it's the absence of meaning you haven't created yet. Pain stays when you don't turn it into something useful. And this is where Stoic practice cuts like a blade. Don't let a memory come back without sending it away transformed. Don't allow a painful thought to hold you hostage without gaining clarity in exchange. If you're going to remember, let it be to learn. If you're going to look back, let it be to adjust how you act today. Every time a memory appears, you have two options: repeat the story or rewrite your interpretation of it. Repeating it pulls you down, rewriting it frees you. Ask yourself, what did this experience show me about myself? What did it reveal about my limits, my desires, my mistakes, my fears? What behavior must I correct because of this? Stoic reflection turns memories into practical lessons, not accumulated suffering. It's not about saying everything happens for a reason, but about saying, I'm going to make this matter. That is the difference between someone who stays stuck and someone who grows. The problem is that most people don't look for lessons, they look for comfort. They return to the memory again and again, hoping that this time it will hurt less, feel different, offer a softer version of what happened. But the memory won't soften on its own. A memory doesn't become relief until you transform it into learning. That is the emotional alchemy the Stoics mastered, turning suffering into wisdom, loss into clarity, failure into inner structure. There is no growth without conscious reinterpretation. Many of the memories that hurt you today could lose their power if you ask the right questions. For example, what boundary did I fail to set? What signal did I ignore? What pattern did I repeat? What part of myself did I give to someone who didn't know how to hold it? What expectation did I place on someone or something that simply couldn't meet it? What behavior must I never repeat again? When you ask these questions, the story stops being a tragedy and becomes a map. And a map is always more useful than an open wound. What hurts the most isn't what happened, it's what you still haven't learned. When the lesson arrives, the memory loses intensity. When understanding comes, the image stops chasing you. When you discover what it was meant to teach you, the past loses its authority over your present. That's why this rule is powerful. You don't need to forget to heal. You need to learn to be free. When you integrate the lesson, the memory stops returning. Not because it disappears, but because it has fulfilled its purpose. The Stoics, far from being cold, were deeply practical. They didn't analyze pain to relive it, but to tame it. They didn't get trapped in explanations, they extracted principles. If someone betrayed them, they learned caution. If they failed, they learned humility. If they made mistakes, they learned direction. If they lost, they learned detachment. Pain, then, wasn't an enemy, it was training. And when you turn pain into training, you stop fearing the past because you know that everything it brings has a purpose. There is something liberating about accepting this responsibility. You can't change what happened, but you can change what it means to you. No one can erase the memory, but you can dismantle its power. You can look at it with distance, with analysis, with calm. You can ensure that each time it appears, you emerge stronger, clearer, more aware. Because a painful memory that doesn't teach you anything becomes useless suffering, but a painful memory that transforms you becomes an internal achievement, proof that you are still evolving. Think about what weighed on you the most this year, that episode, that conversation, that mistake, that loss, that decision that still stings. Now ask yourself with brutal honesty, what is this experience asking me to learn? What should I do differently next time? What part of me must be strengthened? What belief must I abandon? What boundary must I establish? What attitude must I correct? The lesson may be hard, but it's always worthy. And when you find it, the wound becomes a teacher. The past will keep knocking until you receive the lesson it came to deliver. The day you receive it, it stops knocking. That is true Stoic freedom, not forgetting, but integrating, not running away, but understanding, not denying, but transforming. Because turning a painful memory into a concrete lesson is how you stop being a victim of the past and become the author of your present. And when you achieve that, something profound shifts within you. You no longer fear what you lived, because you know you're using it to build the person you want to become. And gradually, the past stops hurting and starts serving. It doesn't vanish, but it no longer controls you. It doesn't erase itself, but it stops weighing you down. It doesn't rewrite itself, but it transforms in meaning. That is the true magic of Stoicism, teaching you that pain did not come to destroy you, it came to shape you. Third Stoic rule, cut mental repetition the moment it appears. There are thoughts that return as if your mind were a room with a poorly closed door. A tiny movement, a brief silence, a momentary pause, anything is enough for them to slip back in without permission, bringing not only the memory of the past, but the emotion that came with it. Sometimes they return with guilt, sometimes with anger, sometimes with nostalgia, sometimes with shame. Sometimes they come disguised as analysis, as if this time they were going to offer you a different answer. But they don't come with answers, they come with exhaustion. They come draining your energy. They come wrapped in the illusion that thinking more will give you control, when in reality, thinking more only ties you more tightly to what has already happened. That's why this Stoic rule is so decisive. If you don't cut mental repetition the moment it appears, the past will keep living inside you, even though it died long ago outside. The mind doesn't know how to stop on its own. It follows the path it has walked the most, even when that path destroys you. And so you find yourself repeating the same images, the same imaginary dialogues, the same alternate scenarios that never happened but drain you just as much as the real ones. You relive arguments that will never return, decisions you can no longer change, pains that no longer exist yet still hold influence. You don't do this because you want to. You do it because your mind learned that the familiar path is the safe path. But familiar is not the same as healthy. What you repeat in your mind doesn't stay in your mind. It spills into your body, your mood, your energy, your behavior. And this is where Stoic discipline enters. Repetition is an unconscious choice, but interrupting it must be a conscious decision. You can't stop a thought from appearing that is not within your control. But what is fully within your control is what you do in the second that follows its arrival. That second, this tiny, almost invisible moment in which you choose whether to follow the thought or let it pass, is the real battlefield. It's not grand, it's not epic, it doesn't look like a spiritual awakening. It's just an internal gesture, noticing the thought and choosing not to feed its chain. But that gesture, repeated consistently, is what separates a mental slave from a free human being. The Stoics knew the mind is skilled at building artificial storms. They knew it could take a small worry and turn it into a dark prophecy. They knew it could repeat a memory until it became a sentence. They knew it could exaggerate threats, minimize achievements, reopen wounds, distort perspective. And that's why they trained the art of observing without following. When a thought appeared, they didn't let it drag them. They watched it, named it, and returned to present action. They understood that what you don't feed dies, and what you feed grows. Mental repetition prolongs pains that could have ended years ago. Every time you return to the same thought, you're not remembering, you're reliving, you're injecting emotion back into a wound that could have healed. You're reactivating mechanisms of the past as if they were still alive today. But the truth is simple. The pain of the past no longer exists. It only exists because you keep reproducing it through thought. And although it's hard to accept, that is a form of toxic loyalty to what no longer serves you. So how do you cut mental repetition? Not with force, not with tension, not with resistance. You cut it with awareness. The moment the thought appears, stop. Don't analyze it. Don't judge it. Don't follow it. Just observe it and return to the present. It can be your breath, your surroundings, the task in front of you. What matters is not where you return. What matters is that you return. Each return to the present is a victory. Each interruption in the chain is a crack in the old habit. Each conscious decision is a reminder that your mind belongs to you, not the other way around. Mental repetition is also an attempt to find closure where none exists. But there are cycles that cannot be closed by thinking. They close through action, through acceptance, through letting go. Thinking doesn't solve what requires action. Thinking doesn't heal what requires a decision. Thinking doesn't repair what requires distance. The mind repeats in order to feel like it's doing something, but in reality, it immobilizes you. And while you're trapped in memories, you lose the only place where life actually happens, here and now. Cutting repetition doesn't mean denying the past. It means breaking the habit of living inside it. It means you stop giving it your hours, your energy, your peace. It means understanding that remembering too much is another form of staying stuck. The past must be consulted like a book, not inhabited like a house. You open it, you learn, and you close it. You don't move in. You don't set up residence. You don't sleep there. The past can instruct you, but it cannot host you. When you interrupt mental repetition, you also take back your emotional power. You stop reacting from old wounds. You stop interpreting everything through old trauma. You stop relating through fear. You stop projecting your past onto new people. Cutting repetition doesn't only free you from the past, it creates space for a cleaner, more conscious, more authentic present. Some people spend their entire lives trapped in a single thought that repeated itself thousands of times without ever being questioned. And others, one day, simply decide that enough is enough, that they will no longer feed what drains them. That day marks the beginning of their inner freedom. That day the mind understands it no longer commands unchallenged. That day the past loses territory. Mental repetition is an invisible leash, but the act of interrupting it is a visible statement of character. It shows strength, awareness, maturity, and self-command. Because whoever controls their thoughts controls their life, and whoever cuts mental repetition stops being a victim of the past and becomes the architect of the present. And when you manage to do it once, even for just a few seconds, your mind learns that another way is possible. When you do it twice, your mind starts respecting you. And when you do it 100 times, you are no longer the same person. You are someone who has reclaimed their inner authority. That is the essence of this rule. Cutting repetition isn't forgetting. It's taking back the wheel. It's telling your mind, "Thanks for the warning, but I decide. And when you decide, life changes. Your perception changes. Your future changes. Because a mind no longer trapped in the past is a mind available to build a solid present and a dignified future. Fourth Stoic rule: renounce the fantasy of having been someone different. There is a silent battle that destroys more lives than any real mistake. The battle against the imaginary version of yourself you believe you should have been. That perfect, strategic, emotionally refined version who supposedly would have made the right decision, said the right words, chosen the perfect path, loved better, reacted better, resisted more, trusted less. That version that seems to watch you from the past with an accusing finger, as if saying, if you had been like me, none of this would have happened. And without realizing it, you believe it. You hand over your peace. You hand over your present. You hand over your self-worth. And just like that, a ghost, because that's all it is, takes control of your life. The Stoics understood that one of the heaviest chains a human being can carry is not what they lived, but what they imagine they could have lived. Because what happened is complete, stamped into reality, belonging to a territory where nothing can be altered. But what could have been, that has no limits. There, your mind creates entire worlds where you were braver, faster, wiser, stronger. Worlds where you didn't make that mistake, where you didn't say what you said, where you didn't love who you loved, where you didn't trust who failed you, where you didn't lose what you lost. And each of those fantasies, far from freeing you, drains you, traps you, condemns you to eternal mourning, not for what happened, but for what never happened at all. That is why the fourth Stoic rule is so radical and so liberating. Renounce the fantasy of having been someone different. Not because you couldn't have done better, but because imagining it changes nothing, fixes nothing, improves nothing. It only steals your today. It only turns you into a prisoner of what if. That what if is the most sophisticated form of mental torture. What if I had spoken up sooner? What if I'd had the courage to end that relationship? What if I hadn't made that decision? What if I had waited a little longer? What if I had trusted less? What if I had been more careful? But behind all those questions lies a perfect trap. The illusion of retroactive control. The false idea that if you think long enough about the past, you will somehow reshape it, lighten its weight, change what it produced inside you. But the past is a wall. You can push against it with all your thoughts, and it will not move an inch. What does move, what does break, wear down, and ache is you. Because every time you fantasize about that alternate version of yourself, what you are really saying is, the person I was just wasn't enough. And that phrase, repeated long enough, drills holes through your self-esteem, erodes your dignity, and pulls you further from any real healing. The mind creates ideal versions of you, not to help you grow, but to punish you. Because if it truly wanted growth, it would look at the mistake with calm, observe the behavior, learn the lesson, integrate the insight, and move on. But fantasy doesn't do that. Fantasy returns again and again to remind you that there was another way, as if that other way had actually been available to you at the time. It wasn't. Because at that time, you didn't know what you know now, didn't understand what you understand now, hadn't lived what you've lived since. No one acts with the wisdom of the future. The mind can travel back with that wisdom, but you cannot. And it is deeply unfair to judge who you were with knowledge that only arrived later. The Stoics taught that most human suffering comes from demanding that the past behave differently, as if reality were a servant obligated to fit your expectations. But reality is impartial. What happened, happened. And the only thing you can control now is the way you interpret that past, not the past itself. Renouncing the fantasy of having been someone different does not mean abandoning your ability to grow. Quite the opposite. It is the first true step toward growth. Because as long as you're trapped trying to mentally correct what no longer exists, you are neglecting the only thing that does exist. Who you are today, how you act today, what you decide today. The past doesn't need new versions of you. The present does. When this truth sinks in, something profound happens. Guilt stops making sense. Not because you didn't make mistakes, but because you realize guilt's only purpose is to keep you small. Responsibility, on the other hand, transforms you. And responsibility sounds like this: I did that. I cannot change it. But I can change who I am from this moment on. That sentence, spoken with honesty, is worth more than all the hours you've spent imagining alternate timelines. You also renounce fantasy when you stop idealizing the person you used to be, as if that old version were someone entirely separate from you. That person was you, with your limits, your wounds, your fears, your hopes, your consciousness at that exact moment. You didn't act to ruin yourself. You acted from what you knew. You made mistakes because you are human, not defective. And if today you see what you couldn't see then, that is not proof of your inadequacy. It's proof of your evolution. The enemy of self-forgiveness isn't the mistake, it's the fantasy. Because as long as you keep creating perfect versions of yourself, you will never accept the real one. And without acceptance, there is no integration. Without integration, no maturity. Without maturity, no freedom. Renouncing fantasy is not resignation. It is courage. It is saying, this is what happened. I don't like it. It hurt. It marked me. But I accept it. And from that acceptance, you build, you strengthen, you correct, you transform. You become someone who, in the future, will look back at their present with gratitude for having had the courage to stop living inside imaginary scenarios. Marcus Aurelius said it best: what happened was destined, not because it was good, but because it happened. And what happened becomes raw material for your character if you choose to work it. What hurt can instruct. What shamed you can humble you. What you regret can make you wiser. But none of that can happen while you remain trapped in, if only I had. Today you have the opportunity to make a pact with the present, to stop modifying the past inside your imagination, to release the identity anchored to what never was, to reclaim your energy for what can be. Because life doesn't ask you to be perfect, it asks you to be honest. And honesty begins the moment you say, I could not have been different then, but I can be different now. That is the real renunciation. That is real freedom. Fifth Stoic rule: stop punishing yourself for mistakes you can no longer repair. There is a kind of suffering that doesn't come from the past itself, but from the way you continue to carry it inside you. A silent, persistent, invisible punishment you inflict on yourself every time you remember the moment you failed, the word you shouldn't have said, the person you hurt, the impulsive decision that still weighs on you, the path you took without knowing how much it would cost. And even though life has already moved on, you haven't. You remain stuck at the same point, as if you owed yourself a debt without end, as if you didn't deserve to move forward, to love, to rebuild, or to breathe in peace until you had paid a price you can't even define. It is not the mistake that keeps you trapped, it's your need to punish yourself for it. The Stoics understood that human beings often confuse guilt with virtue. We think that if we suffer enough, someday we'll feel redeemed, purified, reconciled with our conscience. But that day never comes, because guilt has no finish line. Guilt is a loop. The more you feed it, the more it demands. It promises redemption, but only delivers repetition. And without realizing it, you start believing that this pain is necessary, that it's the price you must pay for having been who you were. But all it really does is perpetuate your wound. A Stoic saw a mistake as an event, not an identity. I did something wrong does not mean I am someone wrong. I failed does not mean I always fail. I didn't know better then does not mean I'm incapable of doing better now. But when you punish yourself, you erase these distinctions. You confuse behavior with value, action with essence, a moment with a lifelong judgment. And that is the greatest injustice you can commit against yourself, turning an instant into an eternal sentence. Ask yourself honestly, what purpose does it serve to punish yourself for something that already happened? Does it correct the past? Does it repair the harm? Does it restore what you lost? Does it heal the one you hurt? Does it make you better? Or does it simply keep you stuck at the moment you fell, never allowing you to rise? Punishment does not transform you. Punishment paralyzes you. For the Stoic, virtue lives in correction, not suffering in acting differently, not torturing yourself for what happened. And yet, how many times do you catch yourself reliving that mistake as if it were the most defining event of your life? You repeat the scene in your mind. You speak harshly to yourself. You remind yourself of what you should have done. You tell yourself you cannot move on because you haven't paid enough for what you did. But that thought is a perfect trap. It punishes your present without improving your future. Some people spend 10, 20, even 30 years punishing themselves for something that, from the outside, wouldn't deserve a week of guilt. But the human mind has a talent for turning a mistake into a prison. And the longer time passes, the more we convince ourselves that internal punishment is a sign of humility. But it isn't. Humility accepts. Punishment perpetuates. Humility acknowledges and transforms. Punishment freezes and destroys. The question you must ask is not, why did I fail? But why do I still allow this mistake to steal my life? Because that is the true harm, not what happened, but what you continue to do to yourself because of what happened. Life has moved on, yet you remain stuck in a single frame, believing that if you stare at it long enough, something will change. But it won't. It never will, because the past doesn't change through suffering, it changes through decision. The Stoics knew that responsibility is not a whip, it is a map. It shows you where you stumbled, so you don't stumble there again. It reveals what behavior must be corrected. It invites you to act with more clarity moving forward. But it never, ever asks you to destroy yourself for what you did. Responsibility elevates you. Guilt sinks you. And you were not created to live underwater. What you must understand is this. Continuing to punish yourself for a mistake is not a sign of virtue. It is a sign of emotional attachment to the past. There are people who no longer know who they would be if they stopped feeling guilty. They have built their identity around regret. Without that regret, they don't know how to see themselves. But that identity is not real. It is psychological captivity. You've grown accustomed to viewing yourself as someone who must pay forever, when in reality, the only thing you must do is learn. Because the mistake, no matter how painful, has already served its purpose. It taught you something. It revealed a weakness. It exposed a part of you that needed maturity. It left you with a scar that, if you view it wisely, is not a mark of shame but evidence of evolution. If you keep punishing yourself for it, you are not honoring what you learned. You are denying your chance to become someone more whole. Life is clear with those who know how to listen. It does not ask you to pay forever. It asks you not to repeat. It does not ask you to suffer. It asks you to awaken. It does not ask you to punish yourself. It asks you to change. And you can change. You have done it before. You will do it again. But not while you continue wasting your energy looking backward for a punishment that never made sense in the first place. Do you know what real emotional self-control is? Standing up after the mistake and saying, "It ends here," not the responsibility, not the learning, but the punishment. That destructive cycle that convinces you that because you failed once, you must fail yourself forever. The Stoics taught something that may sound harsh, but is deeply liberating. You have already suffered enough for what you cannot change. Now, drop the chain. Not because what you didn't matter, but because your life is worth more than your guilt. Stand up and look at yourself with dignity. You are not the mistake. You are not the fall. You are not the version of yourself who acted without the clarity you have today. You are the one who survived. You are the one who learned. You are the one still here. That alone means you are capable of changing your story. So, breathe. Straighten your posture. Stop punishing yourself. What matters is not what you did. What matters is what you choose to do from this moment forward. Sixth Stoic rule: forgive yourself without justifying yourself. Forgiving yourself is one of the most complex battles you will ever face, not because you don't know how to do it, but because you've spent years believing that forgiveness is a reward you must earn, not a process you must grant yourself. You grew up thinking you only deserve relief once you've completely changed, once you've corrected every flaw, once there are no traces left of your mistakes. But human reality is different. No one ever reaches that state. No one arrives at a perfect emotional purity where forgiveness appears as a well-deserved gift. Forgiveness doesn't happen at the end of the journey. It happens when you decide to move forward without dragging chains that no longer serve a purpose. The Stoic knew that self-forgiveness doesn't mean erasing what happened, nor justifying what you did, nor dressing up as virtue what you know was wrong. It's not about softening your responsibility or inventing convenient excuses that make your behavior seem acceptable. No. Forgiving yourself, in its deepest sense, is an act of clarity. It's looking at yourself as you truly are: human, limited, imperfect, evolving. It's recognizing that you made mistakes, but none of them have the power to stop the life you can still build. And above all, it's remembering that you do not need to destroy yourself to prove that you've learned. There comes a moment in life, a quiet, sharp moment, when you realize that continuing to blame yourself doesn't make you nobler, more conscious, or more responsible. It makes you trapped. It makes you someone who uses the past as an argument to avoid the present. And the more time passes, the harder it becomes to distinguish your identity from your wounds. You look in the mirror and see your mistakes before your possibilities. You see your flaws before your growth. You see your past before your future. And then guilt stops being an emotion and becomes a habit. The Stoic understood that prolonged guilt is a form of self-deception. It looks like humility, but it's fear. It looks like responsibility, but it's stagnation. Because the person who blames themselves endlessly avoids acting, they stay frozen, believing they don't deserve to move forward. Guilt may feel righteous, but it transforms nothing. It is pain without construction, an emotion that drains energy without offering direction. And you deserve direction. You deserve it even if you failed. You deserve it even if you don't yet know how to fix everything. You deserve it because you're still alive, because you can still choose, because you can still correct where it matters in what you do now. Forgiving yourself without justifying yourself means looking at your mistake without denying it, not rewriting the story, not inventing reasons to soften your behavior, not lying to yourself to feel better. It is saying, yes, I did this. Yes, it hurt. Yes, it was me, and I still deserve to move forward. That balance is emotional maturity, not avoidance, not punishment. Not minimizing, not dramatizing, simply accepting the truth and taking the next step with steadiness in your heart. But why is it so hard? Because forgiving yourself forces you to accept something profound, that you could have been better, and you weren't. that you had the information, the intuition, or the warning, and still made the wrong choice. That you acted from impulse, fear, ignorance, or wounds. And looking at yourself with that level of honesty hurts. That is why you prefer punishment, because punishment is easier than acceptance. Guilt keeps you occupied. It gives you a false sense of correcting something. It tells you that as long as you punish yourself, you are compensating for what you did. But it compensates nothing. Suffering doesn't correct behavior, it only shrinks you and dims your ability to change. Stoicism proposes something different. Recognize your humanity, not as an excuse, but as a starting point. Because only the one who acknowledges they failed can choose not to fail in the same way again. Only the one who stops justifying themselves can learn. Only the one who stops punishing themselves can change. And only the one who forgives themselves can move forward with dignity. Forgiving yourself without justifying yourself means examining your mistakes with clarity, asking what motivated them, what you were feeling, what you ignored, what you avoided, what emotional pattern was triggered. Because real forgiveness is built from responsibility, not from forgetting. It's not saying, nothing happened. It's saying, it happened, I learned, and I refuse to remain imprisoned by it. Remember, there is a part of you that still lives in the past, not because it wants to, but because it doesn't know how to leave. That part needs you to take it by the hand and tell it calmly, we are not repeating this cycle anymore. Because that is forgiveness. Closing an internal loop, taking power away from a moment that can no longer touch you, using memory to grow, not to destroy yourself. Being responsible without being cruel, being honest without being merciless. There are mistakes that you will never be able to repair externally, people who won't return, opportunities that won't come back, paths that no longer exist, and it hurts. But the Stoic understands that life never demands the impossible repair. It demands present action. It demands a conduct aligned with virtue today, not eternal torture for what has already passed. You cannot go back, but you absolutely can make sure your future is not built from guilt, but from clarity. Look at yourself for a moment with compassion, not pity. You have carried weights that were never yours for so long that they now feel natural. You have spoken to yourself harshly for years, as if that voice were necessary. You've demanded a level of perfection no human reaches. You've mistaken repentance for a sentence. But here you are, trying to do better, trying to heal, trying to correct your life. And that effort, that internal gesture of wanting to move forward, is only possible because there is still strength in you. That strength deserves space. It deserves forgiveness. It deserves for you to stop using your mind as a weapon against yourself. Forgiving yourself does not make you weak. It makes you brave. Because forgiveness, when honest, means embracing your story instead of running from it. It means accepting your shadows without trying to justify them. It means seeing your humanity without shame. It means letting go of what no longer has purpose. And, above all, it means building a version of yourself that does not carry forever the mistakes of an earlier self. So breathe. Guilt has not protected you. Punishment has not made you better. Remorse has not returned what was lost. But forgiveness, if practiced without lying to yourself, can return something. Your life in the present, your power to act, your strength to choose something new, your right to evolve, your dignity intact even after falling. Forgive yourself, not to excuse yourself, not to justify yourself, but to move forward without dragging a cross that never built you. Forgive yourself, and the past will lose its power. Forgive yourself, and your mind will breathe more freely. Forgive yourself, and you will discover that you were always stronger than you believed. 7th Stoic rule: Do not speak about the past unless it is to close it. There are conversations you don't seek, yet they return to your mind as if they had a life of their own. Stories you already know by heart, and still you replay them inside you as if repeating them might change something, but nothing changes. What happened remains exactly as it was, and the only thing that wears down is you. Because every time you narrate the past, you reactivate it. Every time you explain it, you reinforce it. Every time you justify it, you relive it. And there comes a point when you are no longer remembering, you're reopening a wound that was already trying to heal. The Stoic understood this clearly. Words are tools, but they are also weapons. What you name gains weight, what you narrate gains shape, what you repeat gains life. When you talk about the past without the intention of closing it, you are building an emotional bridge to a place where you no longer belong. You are anchoring your soul to a scenario that has already ended. And the result is always the same. You lose energy, you lose clarity, you lose presence. You become someone who lives inside scenes that no longer exist. Repeating painful stories does not free you from them. It chains you to them. Every time you talk about what they did to you, what you lost, how you failed, what hurt you, you are reaffirming your identity around that pain. You are defining yourself through an outdated version of who you once were, through a context that is no longer your current reality, through wounds that may no longer belong to who you are now, but that you continue to feed with words. And words, when repeated, grow roots, even in barren ground. There is something you must understand. The past you don't close rules over you. It doesn't matter how hard you try to move forward. It doesn't matter how many new goals you set. It doesn't matter how many times you say, "It doesn't affect me anymore." If you keep speaking it, you keep living it. If you keep explaining it, you keep justifying it. If you keep sharing it, you keep carrying it. And there is nothing more exhausting than walking toward the future while dragging stories that have already fulfilled their purpose. But here comes the deeper question. Why do you keep talking about it? Why do you keep repeating what broke you, what you failed at, what marked you, what didn't turn out the way you expected? Why do you feel drawn to revisit a chapter you claim you've already closed? The answer, though painful, is simple. Because your story of pain gives you temporary identity. It tells you who you were. It reminds you why you suffered. It offers a coherent narrative that explains your present. And the mind loves coherence even when it hurts. It prefers a familiar, painful past over an uncertain future without a clear narrative. The Stoic breaks that pattern. The Stoic measures their words because they know that talking about the past is not always healing. Sometimes it is repetition. Sometimes it is resistance to responsibility. Sometimes it is justification for staying the same instead of becoming who you could be. The Stoic asks, am I saying this to close it, or am I saying this to remain where it already happened? And if the answer is the second, they choose silence. Because silence, in these cases, is not repression, it is freedom. Not speaking about the past does not mean running from it. It means refusing to relive it unnecessarily. It means recognizing that you have already learned what you needed to learn. It means honoring your own growth. When you speak about the past only to close it, your words become tools of liberation. They help you put a final period, not an endless comma. They allow you to verbalize the most important phrase of all. This no longer defines me. Observe how many times a day you mention old stories, sometimes in casual conversation, sometimes to explain why you act a certain way, sometimes to justify your fears or your limits or your insecurities. If you look closely, you will see that many of these narratives are not meant to close anything. They're meant to hold on to something, to preserve an outdated version of you that you no longer need. And here is something essential. The past stops hurting when it stops being useful. When you no longer use it as an excuse, or as identity, or as explanation. When you stop speaking it, it dissolves. But as long as you narrate it, it will keep a privileged seat at your inner table. Some wounds heal only when you decide to stop describing them. Imagine a physical wound you are trying to let close, but every day you reopen it with your fingers just to check if it has healed. It never will. That is what you do with your memory when you turn it into a constant topic of conversation. The mind does not distinguish between what is real and what is narrated. If you speak about the past, the mind believes it is happening now. The pain returns, the emotions resurface, the body reacts. The wound opens again, and you think you haven't healed, when in reality, you are the one keeping the pain alive. The Stoic, on the other hand, uses words like a scalpel, not a weapon. If they need to speak about the past, they do it with a specific intention: to close, to understand, to clarify, to give it meaning, not to seek pity, not to justify themselves, not to victimize themselves, not to create identity. They speak to end, not to sustain. But reaching that point requires courage. You must dare to let silence do its work. Dare not to repeat the story, even if your mind offers it as a familiar mechanism. Dare to move forward without using your past as the explanation for every step. Dare to face who you are without resorting to who you were. There is immense power in falling silent about a story that hurt you, not because you are hiding it, but because you've decided it no longer deserves a leading role. It is like removing a secondary actor who has been occupying the main role in your inner life. In silence, the story loses force, it loses brightness, it loses authority. And then something new appears. Space. Space to build something different. Space to become someone new. Space for your present life to stop competing with your past life. You must understand something crucial. You cannot be free from the past while you continue speaking it. Every time you narrate it, you attach it to your present. Every time you explain it, you give it permission to remain. Every time you justify it, you validate an identity you no longer want. The past only dies when you stop feeding it. And many times, you feed it without noticing through your words. That is why this rule is so powerful. If you choose to speak about the past, let it be to close it. Let every word be a final brick in a wall you will never cross again. Let every sentence be a goodbye. Let every memory be a lesson, not an anchor. Let every retelling have one purpose: to liberate you, not to bind you. And if it is not for that, remain silent. Not to hide your story, but to protect your future. Because the version of you that you are building deserves a clean stage, not one polluted by repeated narratives. It deserves new words, new thoughts, your energy directed forward, not backward. The past already happened, but it stays alive if you keep telling it. Choose wisely which words will hold your story. And when it's time to speak no more. 8th Stoic rule: separate identity from experience. You have lived things that marked you. You have gone through situations that changed you. You have carried mistakes, losses, shame, betrayals, fears, silence, decisions made in the dark, and consequences that you still remember when the world becomes quiet. But none of that, absolutely none of it, defines you. What you lived belongs to the realm of events, not the realm of identity. You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to do with what happened to you. And that difference, which seems small when said, is enormous when truly understood. Most people stay trapped because they confuse experience with essence. They believe that because they were betrayed, they are unworthy of trust. That because they made mistakes, they are defective. That because they were abandoned, they don't deserve permanence. That because they suffered, they are destined to keep suffering. But the past is not a curse written on your skin. It is an event stored in memory. The label you gave yourself did not come from the event. It came from your interpretation of it. And like everything interpreted, it can be undone. The Stoics saw this clearly. Experience is inevitable. Identity is a choice. You may have lived a fall and still not become a fallen person. You may have been a victim of something and still not live as a victim. You may have made serious mistakes and still not be chained to them. Dignity does not disappear because of painful experiences. It disappears when you decide that those experiences determine who you are. That is the real captivity. Think for a moment about how many times you've said, "This is just how I am," using a past story as justification. I'm distrustful because they betrayed me. I'm insecure because they criticized me. I'm harsh because they hurt me. I'm impulsive because my childhood was difficult. I'm disconnected because no one was there for me. Maybe all of that is true, but it is not destiny. It is consequence, not essence. It is the first version of many, not the final one. And every time you use your experience to justify your identity, you reinforce a prison built by your own hands. The inner enemy, the one you've been fighting for so long, doesn't only hurt you with thoughts, it traps you with definitions. It makes you believe you are your mistakes, your wounds, your past reactions, your weakest moments. But that is not true. Your reactions from yesterday do not represent your entire character. They represent your level of awareness at that specific moment, nothing more. What you did does not determine what you are. It determines what you were able to do with the resources you had at that time. But today, you are not the same person. Today you have more clarity, more maturity, more strength. Today you are here, listening to this, aware that you need to let go of something. And that act, the act of listening with intention, is already proof of growth. Identity is not measured by the past, it is measured by the direction you choose now. The Stoic understood that life is made of perceptions, not raw facts. And the most dangerous perception of all is the one you form about yourself. When you define yourself by your experiences, you limit yourself. When you define yourself by your choices, you liberate yourself. If your identity is tied to the past, your future is compromised. But if your identity is tied to your virtue, your discipline, your temperance, your wisdom, your integrity, then no memory, however painful, can rule over you. Perhaps you grew up surrounded by chaos. Perhaps you had relationships that broke you. Perhaps you made decisions that shame you. Perhaps you failed important people. Perhaps they failed you. Perhaps you disappointed someone. Perhaps someone disappointed you. Perhaps you spent years repeating patterns that harmed you, but none of that is your identity. It is your story. And stories are meant to be understood, not turned into shackles. The Stoic does not deny what they lived. They simply do not turn it into their surname. They don't say, "I'm this way because I suffered that." They say, "I lived that, and from here I choose who I will be." That is the key. Turning experience into direction, not definition. When you adopt this mindset, everything changes. You stop protecting your wounds as if they were your legacy and begin protecting yourself as if you were someone new. You stop justifying your behaviors with your past and begin observing them from your present. You stop reacting as who you were and start acting as who you want to be. And then something powerful happens. The past loses authority. It no longer dominates you. It no longer dictates what you deserve. It no longer determines your decisions. It no longer locks you into a role you never consciously chose. You become the author, not the character. And an author has a power a character never will, the power to rewrite. But to reach that point, you need courage. You need to observe the person you have been without judgment. You need to accept your shadows without turning them into your identity. You need to look at your mistakes without saying, "I am a mistake." You need to look at your wounds without saying, "I am wounded." You need to look at your losses without saying, "I am lost." All of this requires emotional maturity and inner mastery. It requires exactly what you are practicing right now. So, ask yourself, which part of your life are you confusing with your identity? Which chapter of your past are you still using as your personal definition? Which story do you keep repeating to justify your current fears? Which label are you still wearing because someone once told you that's who you were? Maybe they told you you were weak. Maybe they told you you were difficult. Maybe they told you you were too emotional, too cold, too problematic, too intense. Maybe you failed at something important, and since then you repeat to yourself, "I'm not good enough." Maybe someone left, and you believed it said something about your worth. Maybe you yourself repeated hurtful phrases you learned in moments of despair. But none of that is identity. They are opinions, interpretations, loose remnants of old emotions. Your real identity is something silent, steady, deep. It does not change with circumstances. It does not depend on who failed you or whom you failed. It does not come from your wounds. It comes from your virtue. And if you are listening to this now, it is because some part of you seeks exactly that. To remember that you are bigger than your story. Separate identity from experience. Learn to say, "This happened to me, but I am not this." Learn to distinguish between what you lived and what you are capable of building now. Learn to honor your past without living inside it. Learn to look back only to measure how much you've grown, not to chain yourself again. Because when you master that separation, something inside you releases, something breathes, something expands, something awakens. You begin to walk lighter. You begin to decide with more clarity. You begin to act with more coherence. You begin to feel ownership over your own life. And then, for the first time, you begin to understand what the Stoics knew 2,000 years ago. The past cannot chain you unless you are the one holding the chain. Ninth Stoic rule: remove the triggers that pull you back. There are wounds that no longer hurt until something touches them. There are pasts that no longer weigh until a trigger brings them back. There are stories you thought were closed until a message, a photo, an object, a scent, a song, a name, a social media profile, a conversation, a habit, or even a specific time of day opens them again as if they never healed. And it's not that you haven't grown, it's not that you haven't learned, it's not that you haven't moved forward, it's that your environment is still the same environment that once fed your pain. No one can free themselves from the past while still living inside the landscapes where they were wounded. The Stoic understood something most people forget. You are not just willpower, you are environment. You are not just inner strength. You are also the stimuli you consume, the people you keep close, the spaces you inhabit, and the dynamics you repeat. You can have the best intentions in the world, but if your environment pulls you backward, your mind will take longer to move forward. The inner enemy uses external triggers as shortcuts to drag you back. That's why removing those triggers is not cowardice, it's strategy. It's applied emotional intelligence. It's clearing the battlefield so you can reclaim your power. Think about all the times you said, "This time I'm really letting go." But days later, without meaning to, you were once again scrolling through old photos, checking profiles that only reopen wounds, rereading conversations that no longer exist, visiting places that awaken dormant emotions, maintaining connections you justified as being polite, when in reality they were chains dressed up as courtesy. You didn't fall back because you were weak. You fell back because you left doors open, and the past only needs one open door to walk back in. The Stoic understood that the mind is not a sealed chest, it is a garden, and whatever you allow to grow there influences everything else. If the garden is surrounded by trash, by noise, by toxic voices, by shadows that remind you of old storms, it won't matter how hard you work on your thoughts, your environment will eventually seep back in. That's why before trying to heal from the inside, you must clean what's outside. Your environment is not a detail, it is half of your emotional discipline. Removing triggers means cutting the roots that lead back to the past. It means closing doors that lead to old behaviors, old wounds, old versions of yourself. It means distancing yourself from people who keep you in stories that no longer belong to you. It means deleting conversations that only reopen what you're trying to close. It means unfollowing accounts that harm you, ending dynamics that drain you, and replacing the content that weakens you with content that strengthens your character. But here's the real difficulty. Removing triggers hurts. It hurts because it forces you to admit that there are things you can no longer carry. It hurts because it requires accepting that certain bonds, though beautiful once, are now emotional burdens. It hurts because it confronts your own attachment. It hurts because it requires letting go not only of people or objects, but of entire versions of yourself. And letting go of who you once were always hurts a little, even when it's the right thing. Think about it. What's the point of healing if you stay surrounded by what once made you sick? What's the point of moving forward if the path you walk leads you back to the beginning? What's the point of working on your present if you're still exposed to everything that anchors you to your past? Emotional freedom isn't a miracle, it's a process. And within that process, removing triggers is essential. Marcus Aurelius said that the mind adapts to the color of the thoughts around it. Extend that idea. It also adapts to the color of the environment, the noise, the habits, the relationships. If your environment repeats what is old, your mind becomes old. If your environment renews itself, your mind renews itself. External renewal supports internal renewal. When you remove the triggers that pull you back, something deep begins to happen. Your identity starts to disconnect from that past. You no longer have visual reminders pulling you into old wounds. You no longer have lingering conversations keeping you trapped in draining dynamics. You no longer have bonds that force you to relive roles that no longer represent you. You no longer have excuses to fall back into old cycles. And then, for the first time in a long time, you have space. Space to think differently, to act differently, to feel differently, to transform without interruptions. The Stoic knew that your environment must align with your virtue. You cannot live a new life surrounded by old triggers. You cannot become your best self while staying connected to everything that broke your previous self. You cannot move forward if every day you consume things that pull you back into who you no longer want to be. That's why removing triggers is an act of self-respect. It is saying, I deserve a present that does not tie me to a past that no longer belongs to me. Make a mental or even written list of what pulls you backward: a person, an object, a nighttime habit, a memory you keep feeding, a profile you check in secret, a place you return to even though it leaves you empty, a message you refuse to delete because it ties you to a fantasy, a behavior that exists only to repeat a cycle. One by one, identify which triggers act as emotional anchors disguised as routine. And then, one by one, remove them. Not gradually. Not when I'm ready. Not when it stops hurting. Now, with firmness, with intention. with clarity. Because every trigger you eliminate is one more step toward your freedom. Every door you close is a new door that opens toward your future. Every bond you cut is weight lifted off your shoulders. Every habit you replace is a version of you reborn. When you close the access points to the past stops knocking. And when the past stops knocking, the present can finally speak. Then you realize you weren't stuck because you lacked strength. You were stuck because you were overwhelmed by stimulus. The Stoic removes in order to advance. Because advancing, in the end, isn't about moving fast, it's about moving clean. 10th Stoic rule. Do one action today that contradicts your past. Most people believe the past is healed by thinking, analyzing, understanding, talking, remembering by re-examining over and over what happened. They believe that healing is a kind of endless reflection, an emotional puzzle that must fit together before they allow themselves to move on. And yet the Stoic understood something that feels uncomfortable for many. You can understand your past completely and still remain trapped in it. You can analyze every detail, every mistake, every pain, and still live as if nothing has changed. The past is not broken by thought, it is broken by action. A single concrete action has more power than 1,000 well-intentioned reflections. One deliberate action that contradicts your story is worth more than any explanation you've ever repeated to yourself. This is what the Stoics understood deeply. The past is not a prison made of events, but of habits. It is not built from memories, but from repeated behaviors. You are not bound by what you lived, but by what you continue doing because your mind learned it as normal. That's why, if you want to free yourself before the year ends, wanting isn't enough. Understanding isn't enough. Wishing isn't enough. You must act differently. You must challenge your story. You must break the inertia that has kept you stuck for so long. And that begins with one action that contradicts what you've always done. This action does not have to be heroic. It does not have to be grand. It does not have to be perfect. It has to be different. Because when you act differently, the inner world that seemed immovable begins to shift. Something within you wakes up and whispers, "Maybe I'm no longer who I was." And that maybe is enough to spark an inner revolution. The past loses power the moment you choose to act in a way your old self would have never dared. Maybe you've always been the one who stayed silent to avoid conflict. Today, say what you need to say. Maybe you've always sought answers from someone who never gave them. Today, leave that message unsent. Maybe you've always gone back to people who broke you. Today, close that door, no explanation, no goodbye. Maybe you've always promised changes you never followed through on. Today, fulfill one without announcing it. Maybe you've always avoided what scared you. Today, take one step toward it. You don't need a new life. You need one action that proves you can build it. The hardest part of this rule is that it demands real courage. It demands breaking patterns that feel comfortable even when they hurt. It demands doing the opposite of what your mind begs you to do, just to stay in the familiar. It demands discomforting the ego, which clings to the identity it constructed. It demands facing the fear of uncertainty, because anything new activates inner alarms. But remember this, what hurts is not the action, it's the identity you must leave behind in order to take that action. When you choose to act differently, something inside you dies a little, but something inside you is reborn in a much greater way. The Stoic understood that every deliberate action toward your best self is an act of internal resurrection. And they also knew that if you don't break the pattern will break you. That's why they said, "Do what you fear and you will conquer." Acting differently today isn't about changing the world, it's about changing the axis from which you face it. Look honestly at your life. There is something you know you must stop doing. There is something you know you must begin to do. There is something you know deep down that if you did it today, even if small, it would mark a before and after. The problem is, you postpone it while waiting for the right moment, the perfect clarity, the ideal conditions. But the right moment is now. Clarity comes through action. Ideal conditions do not exist. The action that contradicts your past does not wait for your comfort, it demands your decision. The past sustains itself in a very particular way. It feeds on repetition. Every time you repeat a behavior that belonged to a previous version of yourself, you renew the contract with your story. Every time you act as you used to, think as you used to, choose as you used to, you're unconsciously saying, I agree to remain this person. And that's why one different action is so powerful. It breaks the contract. It invalidates the story. It interrupts the cycle. It stops the repetition that kept alive what should have ended long ago. Imagine a chain holding a door shut for years. You don't need to break the chain completely in one blow. One well-placed crack weakens the entire structure. That's what a conscious action is, a crack in the chain of the past. After that crack, every new action becomes easier, every decision lighter, every step forward deeper. And more importantly, your mind begins to believe that change is possible because it is no longer a theory, it is evidence. The action that contradicts your past is also a silent declaration. A declaration that says, I'm not waiting for a new year, a new month, or a new day to live as I should live. It is a way of proving to yourself that you don't need time to change, you only need intention. It's a way of proving that your story is not a sentence but a starting point. When you take that action, you will feel resistance. Your mind will tell you it's unnecessary, that it's not the right time, that it won't matter. It will beg you to return to the familiar. But that resistance is exactly the sign that you're touching the very place where the past sustains itself. Don't run from that resistance, move through it. That discomfort is the sound of the chain breaking. Do one action today that contradicts your past. Not tomorrow, not later. Today, choose something small or something big, just choose it and do it. Don't announce it. Don't explain it. Don't justify it. Just do it. And when you do, pause for a moment and recognize what it means. You have just opened a door that will never close again. 11th Stoic rule. Accept that some answers will never come. There are moments in life when you find yourself staring at the past, the way someone stares at a closed door, hoping that somehow it will open on its own and reveal the truth you've been trying so hard to understand. Questions that hurt. Decisions you never understood. People who left without telling you why. Situations that once made sense and suddenly shattered without warning. And there you were, holding an incomplete puzzle in your hands, searching for pieces that will never return. This is one of the deepest human wounds, the need for an explanation that brings peace. But the Stoics knew something most of us take years to accept. Some answers simply will never come, and waiting for them is one of the most dangerous ways to stay tied to the past. Accepting this truth is not resignation, it is freedom. It is looking at life with a maturity few ever reach, because it requires letting go of the most tempting comfort of all, the comfort of believing that understanding everything is a prerequisite for moving forward. But it's not. It never was. It never will be. Human life is not a perfect book where every chapter ends with clean, well-written conclusions. Sometimes you're left with incomplete stories, open endings, silences that never turn into words. Sometimes you're left with the intuition that something else was there, and you'll never know what it was. Sometimes there is simply no explanation that can make sense of the pain you went through, and that's okay. You don't need total clarity to move on. You need a decision. The Stoics understood that the mind becomes a prisoner when it tries to grasp certainties that do not exist. It's a trap. You tell yourself that you just need to understand, that you just need one more conversation, that you just need proper closure. But that just is a disguised chain. Because while you wait for answers, you don't move. While you insist that everything must make sense, you remain stuck at the same point where you were broken. The obsessive search for meaning becomes a sophisticated form of resistance to the present. It becomes a way of staying connected to the event, the person, the pain. The mind believes that understanding will bring peace, but peace has never come from understanding. It has always come from acceptance. Acceptance means acknowledging that you do not control the full story. It means seeing yourself as someone who can move forward even with missing pieces. It means allowing life to continue even when you didn't get all the answers you wanted. It means letting what's incomplete remain incomplete without turning it into a lifelong obstacle. Acceptance doesn't erase the pain, but it strips it of its power to govern you. This Stoic rule requires courage, the courage to live without guarantees, the courage to let go of explanations you wish you had but never will, the courage to release the illusion that the meaning of your past must be fully revealed before you can walk into the future. Sometimes the explanation you're looking for does not exist. Sometimes it exists, but the other person is incapable of giving you that truth. Sometimes they could give it, but never will. And if you anchor your life to that possibility, you will remain still waiting eternally for something that will never come. The inner enemy loves unanswered questions because they keep you trapped. It whispers, "You need to know before moving on. You need to understand before healing. You need them to explain before you can let go." And you, believing it's prudence, postpone your growth. But it's not prudence, it's fear. Fear of facing the void. Fear of moving on without certainty. Fear that life won't give you the closure you think you deserve. But that fear must be confronted. Because life doesn't pause to give you explanations. Life goes on, and you must go on too. When you wait for answers, you hand over your power. When you decide to move on without them, you take it back. Because moving forward without explanation is an act of self-determination. It is declaring that your future will not depend on what someone else chooses to reveal. It is declaring that your growth is not conditioned by the clarity of your past. It is declaring that your life belongs to you now, not when someone else decides to give you closure. Look at your story with sincerity. There are situations you're still trying to understand. There are conversations you still imagine. There are questions you still repeat every night, hoping that one day they will magically answer themselves. But that day doesn't come. Not because you don't deserve answers, but because you don't need them to become who you are meant to be. Your growth does not depend on understanding the past. It depends on committing to the future. Accepting that some answers will never come gives you energy back. It gives you clarity. It gives you time. It gives you life. Because all the strength you've poured into trying to understand the incomprehensible can now be invested in building something new. All the attention you've placed on analyzing someone else's behavior can now be directed toward your own decisions. All the hope you placed in someone else closing your wound can now be converted into conscious action to heal yourself. There is immense freedom in saying, "I don't know, and I move on anyway." That sentence contains a bravery very few allow themselves to feel. Because in that act, you declare that you don't need anything from the past to move forward. You declare that you do not depend on someone else's truth. You declare that you do not depend on unresolved explanations. You declare that what was left unsaid will no longer determine your path. Life is made of incomplete endings, of people who never speak again, of situations that don't close, of goodbyes without words, of decisions you will never fully understand. And that is not a flaw, it is part of the design of existence. Expecting everything to make sense before moving forward is asking life for something it never promised. Accepting this rule is accepting your humanity. It is accepting that you do not have absolute control. It is accepting that you don't need to solve every mystery to live in peace. It is accepting that your story doesn't have to be perfect to have value. It is accepting that your dignity does not rely on receiving explanations. It is accepting that you can walk forward even with open chapters behind you. And here comes the most transformative part. When you choose to continue without answers, you discover you never needed them. What you needed was to believe that you were capable of moving forward without them. Strength does not come from understanding everything that happened to you. It comes from trusting your ability to face what comes next. 12th Stoic rule: decide on an inner ending before the year ends. There are wounds that do not close with time, but with a decision. And although we all know this quietly, very few have the courage to admit it. Most people wait. Wait for the calendar to do the work. Wait for December to bring clarity. Wait for the new year to erase what the heart has not been able to release. But none of that happens. Time does not close what you refuse to declare finished. Time does not sort out what you continue to hold on to. Time does not cleanse what you do not let go of. That is why this rule is one of the hardest, yet also one of the most liberating. You must decide on a point of closure inside yourself, even if the outside world never marks one for you. The past does not leave on its own. It does not disappear just because it already happened. It does not dissolve magically because the calendar changed. The past persists when you feed it, when you stare at it, when you keep returning mentally to the same scenes over and over again. It persists because you keep it alive. And although it hurts to admit it, sometimes you do it because you're afraid of what comes after. The emptiness, the silence, the freedom. Humans, without realizing it, can cling even to pain because it is familiar, known, predictable. But that attachment is the most refined emotional prison that exists. An inner ending does not depend on someone else apologizing, explaining themselves, recognizing your worth, valuing you, or closing a story in a mature way. An inner ending is not something you receive, it is something you declare. It is a unilateral act of sovereignty. It is looking at a chapter, a person, a mistake, a broken dream and saying, "This is as far as it goes," and doing it not with resentment, but with dignity, because you choose peace, even if the world never delivers it to you wrapped in pretty words. The Stoics never expected life to close their chapters neatly. They knew the mind becomes trapped when it demands perfect emotional justice, when it waits for others to acknowledge what they've done, when it wants the past to return to apologize. But life does not work that way. Life does not give you poetic endings. Life does not arrange your wounds according to your expectations. That is why the Stoic takes full responsibility. If something must end, I will end it myself. And declaring it is not a pretty phrase. It is an internal act that changes your posture, your energy, your direction. It means no longer revisiting old messages, no longer checking profiles, no longer replaying conversations, no longer repeating stories, no longer insisting that something should have been different. It is interrupting the repetitions the way someone closes a door, knowing they will never open it again. Not to deny what happened, but to protect what remains of you. An inner ending feels like a break. It is not comfortable, it is not gentle, it is a clean cut. Because the mind is used to holding on, not letting go. But that cut is the only way to release energy. What you continue to hold on to with the past consumes your life. It consumes your attention. It consumes your presence. It consumes your ability to move forward. It is incredible how much space an unfinished story occupies in the mind. It becomes noise, a shadow, a kind of weight you carry, even when everything seems fine on the outside. You notice it when silence comes and you drift back to the same thoughts. You notice it when a new decision paralyzes you because of an old memory. You notice it when you keep justifying others or punishing yourself. That is the sign you have not closed it. This rule requires brutal honesty. What are you still holding on to that no longer belongs to you? What chapter are you still rereading, even though you know it will not end differently? What story are you still waiting to change on its own? What person do you keep letting into your mind, even though they are no longer in your life? Freedom begins the moment you answer these questions without anesthesia. Deciding an inner ending is not forgetting. It is not erasing. It is not denying. It is accepting. Accepting that it already happened. Accepting that it already ended. Accepting that it will never look different. Accepting that you cannot modify what is already done. And from that acceptance, releasing. The human mind wants certainty, explanations, coherence. But real life rarely offers that. Most of the time, moving forward requires living with the incomplete, yet still moving. When you declare a point of closure, something inside you shifts. Suddenly you walk differently. You no longer revisit the past every day like someone checking an open wound. You no longer dwell on the same thoughts that held you captive. You no longer let nostalgia, regret, or resentment dictate your present. You reclaim your power because you're no longer looking backward as if something there could still save you. Here is the deepest truth. Not closing a cycle means your emotional energy is still tied to it. And if your energy is stuck back there, it cannot be here. It cannot fuel your growth, your new relationships, your new habits, your new dreams, your new identity. It is like trying to walk forward while keeping one hand fixed on a wall behind you. You may take steps, but you never truly move. Your life advances in appearance, but not in essence. Until you let go, many people spend years trapped in a single memory because they never made the internal decision to close it. They tell themselves they have already moved on, but their mind visits it every night. They say, "It doesn't affect me anymore," yet their current decisions are still shaped by it. They claim, "I don't care," yet their emotions still react. The truth is simple. What you do not declare, finished stays. Even if it hurts, even if it destroys, even if it drains your life. That is why this rule is an act of profound personal sovereignty. You are the one who ends what must end, even if no one else does. Not out of pride, but out of mental health. Not out of disdain, but out of self-respect. Not out of coldness, but out of emotional maturity. Declaring an ending is not a rupture with your past, it is protection for your future. Some things, some people, some chapters will never change, and clinging to the illusion that they someday will is the most silent form of self-sabotage. Misplaced hope becomes a prison, and what you are waiting for to change on the outside must change on the inside. So, listen carefully. Before the year ends, decide what will not follow you into the next one. Decide which pain you will no longer carry. Decide which explanation you will stop waiting for. Decide which story you will no longer relive. Decide which part of you must die so that another part can finally be born. Because freedom doesn't come from time, it comes from decision. There comes a moment when looking back no longer serves you. Not because the past doesn't matter, but because clinging to it robs you of the only thing that truly exists, your ability to act today. And as I've spoken to you throughout this episode, as we walked through memory, guilt, repetition, and the fantasy of what could have been, I know something inside you began to shift. It wasn't noise. It wasn't nostalgia. It was that quiet intuition telling you that you can no longer keep living inside the same circle. That inner voice that does not lie, does not dramatize, does not exaggerate, the voice that appears when you finally accept that there will never be a better opportunity than this one to close, to release, and to move on. Freeing yourself from the past before the year ends is not a symbolic goal, it is a spiritual urgency. Because if you don't do it now, while you can still make conscious decisions, life will force you to do it later, in harsher, slower, and more painful ways. The past does not disappear on its own. It does not vanish because the calendar flips. It does not dissolve simply because you decide to stop thinking about it. The past weakens only when you strengthen. And today, by listening to this full episode, by opening yourself to these rules, by allowing yourself to question what you always assumed, you unknowingly began the exact process your soul had been asking for. To stop negotiating with what no longer exists. You know better than anyone how many times you returned to the scene that broke you, to the person who did not choose you, to the mistake you made, to the old version of yourself you thought you should have outgrown long ago. And every time you went back, you lost breath. Because the past has a strange way of trapping you, not by what happened, but by the interpretation you still hold. By the stories you keep repeating, by the explanations you still wait for. But if there is one thing I want you to engrave deeply within you, it is this. The past owes you nothing. Nothing. Not closure, not justice, not apologies, not clarity, not repair. Expecting these is bondage. Accepting this is liberation. And I know it hurts. It hurts to let go of something you believe deserved a different ending. It hurts to accept that you cannot rewrite what happened. It hurts to recognize that some wounds heal only when you stop touching them. But that pain is a bridge, not a prison. That pain is a rite of passage. And as you cross it, you discover the real thing that held you back wasn't the memory, it was the emotion beneath it. The fear of moving forward without the story that defined you for so long. Because even pain becomes identity if you hold on to it too long. But today, you are no longer there. Today, you are different. You are no longer the person who came into this episode afraid to look inward. You are no longer someone hiding behind excuses or endless waiting. Today, you are someone who chose to face your own shadow with a level of clarity few are willing to practice. And that already makes you freer than you were yesterday. Because freeing yourself from the past is not forgetting. It is not denying. It is not minimizing. It is integrating. It is accepting that your story brought you here, but does not define you. It is realizing that every mistake, every fall, every betrayal, every failure, every loss was actually a silent preparation for this precise moment. The moment you realize you can continue without carrying anything that no longer belongs to you. And that realization is powerful, transformative. It is the spark that ignites a truly different new year. But let me tell you something else, something perhaps no one has ever said so directly. Freeing yourself from the past is not an emotional act. It is a moral one. It is a duty to the person you are meant to become. Because as long as you hold on to your broken version, you leave no room for the strong, lucid, disciplined, present, serene version of yourself waiting to emerge. You stop living not because you don't know how, but because you keep interpreting your life through an old wound. And you are no longer that wound. You are the one who survived it. You are the one who learned from it. You are the one capable of creating a future without repeating it. These days left before the year ends are not a countdown. They are a portal, a psychological threshold where the mind is more willing to let go, to cleanse, to reorder, to say, enough. Don't waste that portal by returning to stories that can no longer give you anything new. Use it to declare yourself free, to declare finished what you have kept emotionally pending, to show yourself, through visible action, that you want peace more than you want to be right about what happened. And hear this, because it may become the phrase that guides your next year. You are not what you lost. You are not what you failed. You are not what was done to you. You are not what you didn't achieve. You are not what you were promised and never received. You are what you decide to be from today onward. Your identity is not written in stone. It is written in habits, in choices, in thoughts, in priorities, in silent decisions you make when no one sees you. And when you decide to leave behind what hurt you, you are not running away. You are reclaiming your sovereignty. Many believe that freeing themselves from the past means healing until there is no pain left. But the Stoics knew the truth. It is not the absence of pain, but the absence of bondage. Because pain is human, but imprisonment is optional. And if something has followed you for years, it is not because it is part of your destiny. It is because you had not yet stopped to question whether you actually need to carry it to move on. Today, you questioned it. Today you saw it clearly. And that changes everything. From now on, whenever a thought from the past tries to pull you back, you will remember this. You have already crossed the threshold. You no longer live there. You no longer operate from that version of yourself. Your present has more strength than your memory. Your choice weighs more than your story. And every day that you act aligned with who you want to be, not with who you were, life will begin to rearrange itself. Not because everything becomes easy, but because you have stopped standing in the way of your own freedom and your own future. And this is how the episode ends, with a truth, simple yet transformative. The past ends when you decide to end it. And today, even if you don't say it aloud, even if you don't celebrate it, even if something inside you still trembles, you have already ended it. Your voice matters here more than you think. Every insight you share strengthens and elevates this community, because this isn't just another space. It's a circle of people who choose to live with intention, with discipline, and with character. Each of you leaves a mark, and the reflection that receives the most support will be pinned as a banner of who we are. Not as decoration, but as a reminder of the kind of warrior who chooses to think, feel, and act with stoic clarity. Because this is a community that doesn't run from pain, it walks through it with courage. A community that doesn't look for cheap comfort, it seeks wisdom. A community that doesn't break under adversity, it turns it into strength. And if you've made it this far, it's because something inside you is already shifting. Something is waking up. Something is asking for more. So, before you leave, check the description. There you'll find the paths we created to help you keep strengthening your mind. They're not there by accident. Each one exists to help you go deeper, build inner resilience, and return again and again to that place within you where nothing and no one can take your peace. Subscribing isn't doing the podcast a favor. It's an act of respect toward yourself. It's choosing not to live on autopilot anymore. It's committing to think differently, to feel with more order, to live with more intention. Because every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we publish reflections designed to stay with you when life gets heavy, when your mind gets loud, when you need a reminder of who you are. Not following us means risking missing the one lesson you might need in the hardest moment. And if you choose to go a step further, if you choose to become a member, understand one thing clearly. You're not donating, you're sustaining a mission. Because of you, this flame stays alive. Because of you, we can keep spreading Stoicism as a refuge for millions who are fighting not to give up. Your support is what keeps this podcast alive, strong, and growing. You're not a spectator, you're part of the foundation holding this community together. I'll see you in our next Stoicism for Winners session, where we'll keep exploring the depth of Stoic wisdom applied to everyday life. In the meantime, dive into the recommended sessions in the description and continue your path. And until we cross paths again, don't forget this: you are the master of your perception, the guardian of your peace, and the warrior of your own battle. That is the legacy of Stoicism. That is the art of becoming invincible.